So, Alexander, welcome to the channel. Really excited to have you today to learn a little bit about your background and also about KDB, which has been kind of on the fringes of my knowledge, but never really crossed my path here. Why don't you just kick us off and give us a little bit about kind of your background, your education, and how you got kind of in the industry and kind of working with quantitative finance?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me today. My name is Alexander Unterrainer. I'm a KDB developer for the last 7, 8-ish years. I have a mixed background between finance and computer science. I did a high school as a programmer, and then when I finished high school, I didn't really wanted to continue, computer science. I graduated in 2006. In Italy, in Europe. So you need to be aware that, the internet looked different. Facebook was just emerging. The iPhone wasn't there. So it's not that cool place that it is nowadays. So I didn't really want to study computer science and started working randomly applied at companies. And I got into a small investment bank where I'm from. And I was the assistant of the portfolio manager at this time. So, I was 19 years old, never had to do anything with stocks or finance. And then, I still remember the first day I was sitting in front of a Bloomberg terminal and the portfolio manager showed me, like the different stock markets and the indexes. And to me, that was so fascinating. I fell in love with finance. It became an addiction. The first thing in the morning I would do is like switch on the TV, watch Bloomberg TV, and see how the stock markets in Asia closed. And I got really passionate about portfolio management. And then after 3 years, so I worked between 2006, 2009 through the financial crisis. I saw how Lehman defaulted. I decided to pursue a university degree. So I did a bachelor in economics and management. And because I had a background in programming, the high school I did was a high school for programmers. I realized that you can combine finance and computer science programming, algorithmic trading, um, I saw an article in The Economist about machines taking over Wall Street. Every few years you get this hype, AI is taking over, machines are taking over. Now ChatGPT is really hyped and so I was like, okay, cool. I like programming and I like finance and I can combine those two passions of mine. And so when I finished my bachelor, I looked into masters in computational finance. And then I did two master degrees here in the UK and then joined a grad scheme at Citigroup. That's where I started.
Mhm.
And just by pure coincidence, my flatmate at the time, he also worked for Citigroup and he worked with KDB. And he told me about KDB, what it's good for, that it's used by a lot of quants and on the trading floors. And that's when it really became clear to me that KDB is what I wanted to do because it's so close to finance. And, as I said, I I'm passionate about finance and computer science. So, it just made sense to me to focus on KDB. And yeah, I've been doing KDB since then. So I started the grad scheme at Citi in 2015, and in 2016 I joined the KDB team at Citi in London. I was there for 1.5 years, and then for like internal reasons, they decided to move me from the KDB team to another team, to a Java team. And I really wanted to stick in the KDB space, so I moved on. I then joined Morgan Stanley, worked a little bit there, then moved on to UBS. At UBS, I was working on the trading floor for quants directly, rather than on the tech side of things. Um, and then after UBS, I went to HSBC and I was there for 3 years. And then last year in April, I joined Data Intellect, which is a consultancy firm in KDB, as a consultant. So now I'm working on client side on one of their clients' projects. And last year in September, as you know, I started my blog, DefconQ, which is like a KDB technology focused blog to help people to understand a little bit more about KDB, to help beginners get started, to explain what it is, how you can use it, why it's so powerful. Yeah, and that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Do you want to talk a little bit about what KDB is? So even me, but working in the quant space for so long, I remember applying for my first jobs. You go out there and you're looking for jobs. And KDB kept being one of those things that would like occasionally pop up as like a skill set you needed. And I never really got into it. I ended up, segueing into risk, and then it was into, credit modeling. And then I keep seeing KDB pops up. I even get vendors message me like, "Hey, we could help you set up your KDB and get you guys all switched over." Can you talk a little bit about like what sets KDB apart from other languages? And you've kind of mentioned and hinted at it's used typically on like trading and finance applications.
Yeah, sure. So just to clarify a little bit, like some confusion that might arise. So sometimes you hear KDB, then KDB plus, KDBQ. So those are really all synonyms. Like you can use them interchangeably.
Okay.
KDB, it's called KDB because it stands for K, which is the programming language, and DB for database. So K was originally invented by Arthur Whitney in the early 2000s. It's based on A plus, which is the predecessor, and he developed that at Morgan Stanley in the late 80s. And then he moved from Morgan Stanley to UBS and created K there. And so KDB, K is the programming language, and DB stands for database because it's actually both. It's like a very powerful, high performant database with an integrated programming language, which was K. Now, there are several iterations of K, and the fourth iterations has been renamed into Q, which is basically a wrapper around the K language because K is quite hard to read
Okay.
if you're not familiar with it. So then, because a lot of people actually, I'm not sure whether they complained about it or it was just like they wanted to make it easier to read, so they created Q, which is the wrapper around K. And Q is basically, it's like a, vector or array oriented programming language that is very, very fast to perform analytics, because it's like vector oriented. It has it's an interpreted language. It's dynamic, and it has a lot of functional features. It's not purely functional because like the definition of a functional programming language means that a function could not have a side effects, whereas in KDB a function can actually have a side effect. So um,
It is Q slower than K on its own? Is there like a
um,
on why you would program maybe in the older versions?
No, no, because basically a lot of inbuilt operators in Q under the hood, they are programmed in K,
Okay.
and K under the hood is actually programmed in C. So it has actually a very small footprint. Like the whole language itself, it's only um 30, 40 lines of C code. Arthur Whitney is an incredible computer scientist. He's been doing this for, I don't know, like, he started in the 60s, I believe.
Okay.
Um, so he's been doing this for a very, very long time. And yeah, it's very performant. And because it's so small, you can also place it in the L1 or L2 CPU cache. So that would be one reason why you can leverage its performance. And yeah, as I said, it's like columnar. The database actually it's column oriented.
Hmm.
So as opposed to a typical SQL, which is row oriented, that's another reason why KDB it makes it so performant because you just can access like a whole column rather than having to iterate through a whole table, get every cell. Yeah.
That has been my complaint. So I started in SAS. SAS has a
Okay.
similar structure where you call everything by column.
Yeah.
It has to be filled. There is no such thing as like partials or I don't know. You don't iterate either. So when I first started programming in SAS, I was always very irritated because I'm like, oh, if I could just iterate through this. And then I realized the vectorization makes it very fast. And so everything we were doing in time series applications was vector based. And now I've had to move into Python and I'm back into that frustration, which is like,
Yeah.
can't I just pass the column and do the vectorization? So I
Yeah.
I understand that it's definitely a speed advantage and it's definitely a finance feature too, right? We think in financial terms typically in time series column based format.
Absolutely. That's why KDB is so popular in finance. It was actually developed for finance, like A plus, what Arthur developed at Morgan Stanley. It was targeted to work with the fixed income desk at Morgan Stanley, and they had to deal with trillions and terabytes, trillions of rows and terabytes of data, which and we're talking about the late 80s. So, it's
Yeah.
not that nowadays that might sound okay, it's not that much data, but this was the late 80s. So yeah, it's incredible that the language has been around for so long, and it has been doing this for the last 20 plus years. Like a lot of people, when they're not KDB developers, and you always get those developers that are like, oh yeah, but look at DuckDB or QuestDB, they can do this as well. Sure, like they can do that as well, but for what, the last couple of years, like I'm not sure whether it was QuestDB or DuckDB, they recently introduced the as of join, which is very useful in finance. Um, but in KDB, that has been around for the last 24 years,
Yeah.
like it's nothing new. So I'm just like, yeah, it- I'm often surprised that people are like, okay, you can do this with other technologies, but okay, sure, KDB was around for the last 24 years, and it also like there's no other framework or programming language or database where you can build a whole complete application in just one language. KDB is very good for streaming data, in-memory data, and on-disk data. You can build your whole application just with KDB. If you're using other technologies, there is nothing that gives you everything out of the box.
Hmm.
So maybe you have to use Kafka for your streaming, then you use Apache Arrow for in-memory data, and then maybe InfluxDB or QuestDB on disk. And you have to get experts in all of those areas, because it's rarely that you have someone who is like an expert in all technologies or can build something really performant in all these technologies. Whereas in KDB, you don't need to have a database administrator. You don't need to have, just a developer. Then KDB has the querying language like QSQL you can use to query the data. So KDB developers also know that part of the language. So you can really, really do pretty much everything you want with KDB when it comes to big data, time series analysis, and all these kind of operations we use in finance, and we do in finance.
Is model development, does it support like modeling frameworks like ARIMA models or
So they're not, I mean, like I wouldn't say it supports it. Like you would have to develop the model yourself. It's not like in Python where you just import, like a library, and then you can use it out of the box, because KDB, after all, it is a proprietary programming language.
yeah.
So you have to do a lot yourself. And most places that use KDB would also happily do that. Like, they build their own libraries. Um, but it's also quite typical for investment banks. I'm sure you came across this as well. Like a lot of places, everyone thinks they can do things better than everyone else. So they would build their own
Yes.
model, or they, okay, we're not using this library because we can do it better.
Yeah.
So then in KDB, you can just whatever you need it for, you can do it. You just have to do it. Like, and it's used for researching, back testing, transaction cost analysis would be, a very good example. I've seen option pricing in KDB, VWAPs, TWAPs. It's very easy to use KDB for that. You can have algo trading strategies. I know you can build recommender systems in KDB. Then you can do machine learning with KDB, asset price simulation. There's a lot you can do. You just actually have to do it,
Yeah.
and but also, if you really wanna be the number one, and you wanna have the edge over everyone else, you're actually gonna do that. So, I do understand that a lot of people are like, okay, why should I learn KDB? Why should I learn this new language? But you want to be the best one on the market. You want to be faster than everyone else. Then you have to make an investment.
Yeah. I mean, even now I'm at a fintech and we are using Python, right? And everyone thinks Python's magical and you type in a few lines and it does what you want. And we're redeveloping a lot of the packages and creating internal packages. And I'm like, Python's awful. I don't know why everyone's sticking to it. And then I start talking to all these hedge funds and they go, oh, we use Python. And I'm like, which packages do you use? And like, oh, well, we rewrote everything, right?
Yeah.
You've got to make it functional for your actual application. And to your point, if you want to be, fast, if you want to get good solutions, if you want to have something that's better than everybody else, you've got to build it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the industry now. I think a lot of people are too hung up on getting like that quick, easy solution, but they don't realize it's not a very good solution for the application you're using it for.
But like that might be good for prototyping because you want to try something and then if you really want to get faster than everyone else, you implement it yourself. But even for prototyping, KDB is great because you download it, you install it, you launch it, you have the terminal coming up, and that's it. You can start, you can program. You don't need a specific IDE, you don't need anything, you just start a queue process and you can go. You have a wrapper, read, evaluate, print, and loop. Sure, you get that with Python as well, but let's say you want to do Java or C++, you need to have the specific IDE, you need to create a main class, like writing a Hello World program in Java takes you at least 5 minutes. In KDB, it doesn't take me 5 seconds. You just launch it and start it, and then you output Hello World. That's it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's proprietary. So I'm guessing there's a corporation and it's selling it, or is it
Yeah,
still
right.
sold through Morgan Stanley, or how is the
No. So the company that Arthur Whitney, the founder of the inventor of KDB, he founded KX Systems, which then sold KDB, and KX System was then taken over by First Derivatives, an Irish company, and they integrated everything, and then it became KX System. And KX, it's like this. Like an Irish-based company now. They are selling KDB licenses to financial institutions or everyone else who wants to use it. Arthur, he left KX a while ago, and he's now working on the newest programming language. He calls it Shakti, which is going more back towards the K roots in
okay?
terms of syntax. So it's going to be a little bit harder to read and write again, but nothing that cannot be learned. I like to compare it to a foreign language. If you're English and you see, a Chinese text, you won't be able to read it. Or even if it's a German text or Italian text, maybe you can see the words and you can read the letters, but you won't understand the meaning. You have to actually study the language and and that's the same with KDB. You study the syntax. It doesn't take that long to actually get productive, there are some good learning resources on my blog. Actually, I have a blog post about go-to learning resources for KDB. The one I started out with is called Q for Mortals. So it's like a book that walks you through the syntax, and then there's another book called Q Tips by Nick Psaris. I even have it here.
Okay.
Always on my desk, it's a good reference. And then there are a few other resources. KX, they're also pushing towards making the language more accessible and democratize it a little bit more. So they created an academy with online videos and tutorials. And then Data Intellect, the company I'm working for, they also have a blog post and they show how you can integrate KDB with other technologies, what you can do with it. Some architectural discussions. Like the community is it's really growing around and KDB, and it's becoming much more supportive. Even though it's a very small community, I think it got much better over the most recent years.
Okay. And so how did you learn this? Was this when you joined City and then you just
Yeah.
started learning it as you were working on the job?
Yeah, pretty much. I was thrown into the deep water, and then like, you start as part of a team, you get assigned little Jiras, and then you start, and I read Q for Mortals, which is this book which is online on codekx.com. We can put it in the comments, or like, also the link to my blog post with the learning resources. And then I read Q for Mortals, that book, and it explains you the basic syntax and how to use it and what you can do with it. And then you just start working on small tasks that you're getting assigned, and then as you progress, you learn more about it. You learn some deeper concepts. You learn how to build proper applications and architectural stuff, and yeah, that's pretty much it. How you would do with any other programming language.
So
Then it's really up to you as
yeah.
well.
What made you stick with it? Like you seem like, right, you mentioned you were in KDB, you were working at City, you had some opportunities, then you got moved over to Java. But it seems like you really stuck with KDB and it's a
Yeah.
real passion of yours. I mean, you're writing a whole blog on it. It seems like you're really invested
Yeah,
in this.
because once you start learning the language, you appreciate how elegant it is. Like you can do so much with so little code. So there is this comparison that a lot of KDB developers make that for every one line of KDB code, you would have to write at least 10 lines of Java.
Okay.
And that roughly is true. There, it's so powerful, it's so elegant and so terse. So once you're, familiar with the syntax, you really enjoy it, and it's really fun, and it also creates a shift in how you're thinking,
Hmm.
because everything is like vector based. So you don't you don't often need loops. Most of the time, you don't. There are some edge cases maybe where you need a loop that you cannot do with the vectorized operation. But for the majority of the time, you don't need loops. So your mindset focus in solving problems differently. And then, I've been doing it now for 7 years, and sometimes, you look at code in other programming languages, or for every now and then I start some Python training just to see what it is all about. And then I'm like, okay, I need to write this much boiler code to get this simple thing
Hmm.
done. In KDB, it's, like a few characters, or, like not even half a line of code. Like one of the, programming interview questions that often gets asked is like, write me a function that calculates the n numbers of the Fibonacci square as like the sequence,
Hmm.
in KDB, like the solution is 24 characters, and that includes spaces.
Wow.
There's no other programming language where you can write so short and elegant. I mean, sorry, there are other programming languages like APL, which is like one of the programming languages that influenced R to write K, and that are have also such a terse syntax. But it's very elegant, and you can achieve so much with it. It's also very scalable. Like, if you write good KDB code, Q code, it's very easy to scale, both vertically and horizontally. Um, it's super fast. It's really, really good for real-time analysis.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I really enjoy writing it, and I really don't want to work in any other programming language anymore.
I understand that. I think one of the most painful things for me career-wise has been spending so much time in one language. So I originally started off, I mean, grad school was just a nightmare. We did C++, MATLAB, SAS, VBA. Python wasn't a thing back then. We learned R. And then it's like, as we got thrown into the banks, it was the banks were using SAS. And I'm like, I spent like a week on this. This was like a boot camp at, before grad school, and we dove into it. But then to your point, it's as you use it over so much time, you really do start to appreciate the simplicities of it. I don't know if you've used SAS or not, but it's very specialized for financial applications. So everything is table format.
Yeah,
Everything runs in columns. To your point, the only time I've ever had to use a loop was I wanted to loop through all of the columns and then rename them as I ran the tests.
yeah,
and that was like a big thing to figure out. And then after I figured that out, I've never had to write a loop because you're right. You pull in a column, you do a calculation, you do some sort of transformation, and you get results quickly. But then as the career's gone on, it's been painful to go, okay, well, now I'm running a team. I have to switch into Python because our whole tech stack's in Python. So it made no sense to switch into another language and that whole step. But I do see that part of me wants to go back to something more vectorized just because it's
Yeah,
faster, it's simpler. I even debate on just scrapping Python and going back into either R because R is also vectorized, which
yeah,
I mean, a finance person, it makes sense. Everything's a vector.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
no reason to,
absolutely.
yeah, to run rows. So, I mean, what really kicked you off too on this same topic here of like, how did you get into the blog? I mean, what drove you to
Um,
start the blog, career-wise, aspirations with it?
yeah, yeah. So because at some point it was actually really hard to find, how do you learn it? Where do you start? Some of the documentation was not super clear and structured. So I was like, okay, I wanna, learn myself some more, and I want to learn how to build applications and how to do things properly. And to me, like really the only way how to fully understand something is if you can explain it to a 5-year-old child. And so I
Mhm.
decided I'm gonna learn and I'm gonna read about stuff, and then I'm gonna try to explain it as simple as possible so that someone who's not coming from the KDB scene might understand it. And then I started, and that's how I started my blog. And then it was also like a little bit from a personal perspective. I wanted to kind of keep being motivated to do things, and I thought if I start a blog and I'm advertising it there on LinkedIn, hey, here's my new blog, I'm writing about KDB. If I then stop after 2, 3 blog posts, then people are going to be okay. So now he did 2, 3 blog posts and now he stopped. So um, that's really it. And then yeah, so it got a little bit of attention, or people started to appreciate it, and I got really good positive feedback, and I got a lot of support from different people in the industry, and that gave me a lot of satisfaction, and I've been invited to speak at the conference in Madrid, which I did in April, and then KX, and they had a meetup recently in London, and they asked me to be part of their panel. And after the panel, I had a few people coming and saying like, yeah, they because I also explained how I got into it and my struggle initially, and they could reason it with me. They had the same struggle at the beginning. So I see there's actually, the need and the market out there to explain it, and kind of like try to bring it more into other areas as well. And yeah, so I just always like explaining things and sharing knowledge. So, it also gives me some satisfaction, from by doing that. And it's my way to give back to the community. I worked with a lot of quite good KDB developers. Not always did I get the knowledge that I wanted, because not everyone is good at knowledge sharing. So I
Mhm.
think it's really important that if there are people who are good in sharing their knowledge and are happy to do it, they should do it. And you know, I'm just one of those people. I like to share my knowledge. Maybe I'm not the smartest KDB developer out there, or the brightest person, but I try to make sure that what I'm teaching is correct and accurate, and then I pass it on, and everyone can take it from there, and maybe they give back to someone else, mentor someone more junior, and yeah, so that's pretty much the reason why I started my blog.
How long have you been doing the blog? It's been pretty recent, right?
Yeah, so I started in September,
Okay.
and I've been pretty much posting roughly. I try to post every week, and then some part, sometimes certain topics take longer. I have one blog post where I worked through some code, so that took me a while to write, because I literally break down the code comment by comment and I explain it, and it got longer than I expected initially to be, because it's only 80 lines of KDB code, which like and it actually entails like two of the core processes you use in a KDB application. And it's only 80 lines of code. But because I was explaining it, comment by comment, I broke it down, step by step. It took me actually quite a while to write. So on average, I would post every 2 to 3 weeks. So I think I have 26-ish blog posts out there now. And I just plan to keep doing it until, I don't know, until I have time for it. Or actually I make the time. So yeah, I plan to keep doing it.
I think you'll be amazed if you do it for a couple years, the amount of people it actually touches. So I've been doing YouTube since I think 2016, maybe 2015. And in my mind, right, it's like you're the person behind the screen that's making the content and then you just publish it. And I had a few good feedbacks, right? Some people invited me to speak, you had a few thank yous. And now that I'm solid, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years into this, now I'm starting to get the volume. People are like, hey, Dimitri, I work at, this bank doing this. I'm a vice president now. I really wanted to thank you. I watched your videos, 4 years ago, and it helped me get this job. And I think it's as a content creator, right, you're wanting that feedback. It's nice to see that it's really helping, but I think you will always be less aware and less informed than your full total impact. I think it really takes years to have kind of those dividends start coming back and you're realizing like, okay, I'm not just a crazy person, that's writing content out and trying to do things that I think are enjoyable. And you never really know if somebody else is getting that gain from it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's to your point, it's hard to keep going, I think, at the beginning. And then once you start getting the feedback, then it kind of starts snowballing as you get rolling with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're doing a great job. You're a celebrity. Like, I've been following you for a couple of years now, and I think it's great what you're doing, because the reason why I didn't started studying straight after high school is because I had no idea what I want to do. And like, for example, the region I'm from in Italy is really small. So, like the stock market, it's not the common topic, when you speak with the average person. So I didn't know that those things exist. So, I was 28 when I started the grad scheme at City, which was really, really late compared to some people who were 21. They did, and they had like, there was a perfect red line in their life. They did I don't know, high school and then they went to bachelor and then they did internships during the summer because the internship leads to a grad scheme. I had no idea about that, I went from doing my master's straight to a grad scheme and I really struggled to find a job to get onto one of the grad schemes because I had no idea that the grad schemes for this year are actually filled to at least 50% with the interns from the previous summer.
Yeah.
So to me that was all new and what I want to say is that you're doing a great job by kind of like talking about all those things. How do you get into quant finance, which degrees you should get, what you should focus on, what are the different roles like between quants, because quant is such a broad topic. Nowadays, you
Yeah.
have, one quant for every single little thing you can do. You have interest rates quants, you have equities, you have quant researchers, you have quant devs. And if you're an outsider and you never had someone who explains you those things, you're lost. And to be honest, when I got into the industry, um, I felt a little bit lost. So
Mhm.
thank you very much for doing what you're doing. And I think you're kind of like a role model, like kind of like a mentor someone can look up to if you don't have anyone. I mean, they can look up to you no matter what, whether they have friends who work in the industry or their parents or whatsoever. It's always good to have one more rather than one less. So
Yeah.
it's great what you're doing and definitely keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of got into it kind of the same way you're talking about, right? I mean, I grew up for people in the US, Washington State, which is like everyone thinks Seattle, and we're on like the other side of the state, completely opposite. It doesn't rain there hardly ever. And I was working construction in high school the last few years there. And I'm graduating and I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I have no idea. My parents are like, you're gonna go to college. And I'm like, okay. My parents submitted my applications for me. Like I didn't even apply to college. My parents sent everything. And like, yeah, you'll go to college. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll be a plastic surgeon. So I did biology and started that. And I was like, blood's not for me. I don't want to do this. And then I transferred schools, went to a different state school, again, generic state school. My dad was running a business. So I thought, what's the easiest thing to do? Let's just pick business, right? Business makes sense. I'm just going to do finance. And so I just did finance. And to your point, I'm still lost. I don't even know what is out there, what it looks like. And then you're getting corporate finance classes, which is very different. And then I started kind of falling in love with stocks, like you mentioned in your journey, right? And I'm like, this
Yeah.
is really cool. Like, I didn't realize this was a whole career. Like, I knew there was, you read about it in the paper occasionally, the stories on Wall Street or whatever. And then it ended up being this case where I fell in love with it. I graduated, realized I picked the wrong degree. I didn't even know which way I was going, then failed at applying to a bunch of grad schools, and then finally getting into Michigan and finishing up there and dropping that program and going to applied economics. And then to your point, I started my career and you go on the internet and everyone's like, this one thing is quant finance. And you're like scratching your head, like, okay, I guess I'm not really a quant, right? That have nothing to do with the industry. And then you start talking to other people and you're like, well, maybe this other person also is a quant, but that's not the same as the first person. And so I think a lot of the reasons I've created these videos and to your point, kind of stuck with the content creation has been that process. Like I realized I was lost. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't grow up in a big New York City and, had parents that knew finance and industries and markets and had connections. And so I think a lot of my channel is kind of to your point of how do I explain this to people that have not had that career path and don't even know it exists. A lot of people, like yourself and myself and everyone's like, we don't know if quant finance is an industry. It just seems like it's just finance. It's just this one space. But
Yeah.
it's been a good journey. I guess I'll have you answer this question. One question I get asked a lot is it too late to join quantitative finance? I get a lot of students or I guess practitioners or up and rising people who say, hey, Dimitri, I'm 25, I'm 30, I'm wanting to get into quant finance. Do you think it's too late?
Yeah. Yeah. So from a KDB perspective, becoming a KDB developer, it's never too late to, like shift career and generally like I realized that, I also thought sometimes, okay, I'm getting too old for certain things, but like, we're gonna work until we're 60, 70 maybe. So it's like, okay, so you're 40, you have to work another 30 years. Like, do you want to really spend the rest of your life with something you don't like? Or, if you fancy switching career at that point of life, why not? Okay, sure. Sometimes it's not always possible because it has consequences, like you take a hit on like salary because you have to start from scratch and with KDB it's not that, with Python if Python, like you can relatively pick it up easily yourself and then build your own portfolio and do stuff. And if you're a Java developer, maybe you can kind of like even switch
Mm-hmm.
from Java to Python, on a making a horizontal move. With KDB, it's often hard to do that. So you might have to step back and start, as a junior. But the like if you really want to switch from anything else to KDB, what I would recommend, start to find roles where you have to use a little bit of KDB on the job. You maybe you're not a pure KDB developer, but you have to interact with it. And then you build up, your expertise and you can say, okay, I've worked with KDB to a certain extent, and then you can fully switch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also like, in the quant industry, you don't need to be a hardcore KDB developer. You're only doing like a certain part of it. You would maybe do your modeling in KDB or accessing the data and you would have like a dedicated KDB team around the building the infrastructure, building the data pipeline, and you can just use the best of KDB for the specific task you're trying to solve, but that's true with other programming languages as well. Like as a quant, you probably never build the data pipeline if
Yeah.
you're not using KDB. You write your model in Python and you access the data, um, and that's about it. But the reason why you should use KDB is actually because it's both a programming language and a database, so you can bring your business logic to the data. So your
Okay.
analytics run straight where the data is. That's one of the reasons why it's so fast and so performant. Whereas in Python, you have to fetch the data, pull it into your Python application. That already takes time, and then you need to process it. With KDB, like the functionality sits directly where your data is.
Mm-hmm.
So it just like if the data is in memory in the RDB, which would be the real-time database, you have the data in memory, you can just run the functions there, and you don't need to, send the data across the network. You run some analytics, some aggregations, and then you just return a subset, the result, or whatever you need. And even on disk, KDB is also highly performant when it comes to data on disk. The data actually doesn't get everything. It's not everything that gets loaded in the memory, but it's memory mapped. And if you do like a select query and only specify specific columns, only that data will be mapped into memory.
Okay.
So and that only works because it's column oriented. If you are row oriented, you need to get the whole data into memory. And here we are back again to saying what's so great about column oriented databases,
Yeah.
because you only select your subtask,
Yeah, definitely.
subset of data. Yeah.
What made you go back for the master's on this, tying into this kind of this career process that you've gone through here and falling into KDB? But also, I think it's interesting you have two master's degrees.
Yeah.
And why did you choose to kind of go with two master's degrees?
So the reason for that is it's a little bit not such a great thing in the financial industry. If you want to work for an investment bank,
Mhm.
you need to graduate from one of the top universities. It's no one will admit it. It's kind of an unspoken rule that happens, which I've seen. I've applied at various grad schemes. So I did a master first at a not so well-known university in the UK. It was outside of London, and I submitted at least 300 applications, and I wouldn't even, come back, get anything back, no first round interviews, no phone screening, nothing whatsoever. And with the grad scheme, the grad schemes, they open up in September, and by the time Christmas comes, if you don't have a role secured for the next year, you won't have a job next year. So then in March, when I did not have a job or a role, I applied at UCL, University College of London, which is one of the top universities in the UK and worldwide as well. And then I did a second master there. And then, within 1 week at UCL, I interviewed with all the top 5 investment banks. And then the only difference on my CV were those 3 letters, UCL, University College of London. The university, they even had some, collaborations with certain investment banks where you didn't have to do online applications, no first round phone interviews. They would have like, a CV session, a CV lab where you could come in, and they would, recruiters would go through your CV and tell you how to make it better, how to make you stand out. But they would also give you like, here's my email address. If you want to apply for a grad scheme at this investment bank, send me an email, and then you get fast tracked to a first round in-house interview, and you don't have to do all those online applications. You don't get these, online tests that you have to pass. And it was really frustrating for me because I actually had an offer from UCL, which I declined because I thought the master I was actually doing was better. So my first master was in high frequency finance and trading, and which had nothing to do with high frequency and finance. It was just marketing from the university because we did MATLAB and Java, and that's not high frequency, right?
No.
And UCL was in financial risk management, and it was very mathematic intense, and I'm not a mathematician. And at the time, I wanted to do something more in, computational finance, algorithmic trading. So I thought the other masters suits me better. So I actually declined UCL and went for the other one because, where I come from, you work hard, and someone will give you a chance. You need to prove yourself, but eventually someone will give you a chance. And unfortunately, in London, I found out the very hard way that that is not the case. So then, when I didn't have an offer from a grad scheme, I just reapplied at UCL, and then I did a second master there in financial system engineering. And
Okay.
then, as I said, I was like, 1 week there, applied and had assessment centers, interviews, and whatsoever, and then in December, I actually got my offer from Citigroup. So it worked out well in the end, but
It takes more
yeah,
time.
it just took more time. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of my experience with, I had my undergrad degree in finance from Washington State University, which was like a no name, middle of a wheat field agricultural school. You learn farming and whatnot. And then I went to University of Michigan, and we had kind of a weird split where the business school had what you were talking about. I was like shocked. It's like they would have, these career sessions. You had so many credits. You could sign up to interview with Goldman Sachs and Citi and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, everything. And you're right. You would just get like right in the door. They would come and pay. The companies would cater and provide food and networking events. And I'm like on the other side of the country a couple years before, like begging for a job with a similar
Yeah.
degree. And in my experience, the education was almost the same, which was really surprising for me at least. I thought, going to this big school, getting all this special catering, that the education would be very different. And oddly enough, I noticed their business program there at Michigan was almost the exact same curriculum I'd already taken in undergrad. But it does make a difference to get that foot in the door,
Yeah.
to have those letters on your resume, that you went to the school they recognize. I think it's unfortunate in many ways, right?
Yeah.
You have to pay more money and you have to go to this specific school to get into these specific jobs. Um, but yeah, I can feel the pain of why you would have to go back and do it. We had a student that did a similar thing. They had a financial engineering degree from their home country in Eastern Europe, couldn't get a job in London, right? They're
Yeah.
applying. He's like, there's no jobs. So then he had to spend another $70,000 to come to the US just for the tuition to go to Michigan. And then he got
Yeah.
a job afterwards, like magically.
And it's very sad and unfortunate because, like some of the best people I work from are Polish, Eastern Europe, Hungarian, like incredibly smart people and just because the universities are not as recognized,
Hmm.
even though the degrees are often really, really good and very, very strong. Yeah, there's nothing you can do much about it. And like when I was at City, I actually then volunteered to be part in the assessment centers and be on the other side of the table and interview candidates. And I got to speak with one of the HR ladies, and then I actually asked her, like how many applications we get for like the technology grad scheme. Like we Citigroup in my year cohort, we were 26 people, and
Hmm.
she said like they get on average um, between 30 and 35,000 applications for
Wow.
26 roles. And it's just because everyone wants to work in finance. And then, they don't have the time to go through 35,000 CVs. They do
Yeah.
a simple, select from where university is in this list of, universities. And then maybe you shrink it down to 10,000 and you still don't have the time to read it. So,
Yeah.
so those people then get online tests and whatsoever. And then, you drill it down to 1,000 and then maybe you have phone interviews and then final assessment center. But there's no way they can read 35,000 CVs. And it's really unfortunate because, I've and this is crazy, like so I met a lot of people that were on sales and tradings programs that came from a university like Oxford and had a degree in geography. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a smart person,
Yeah.
but the fact that I was rejected after my first master, after having done a bachelor degree in economics and management, a master in high frequency finance and trading. I worked for 4 years full time as the assistant of the portfolio manager, like throughout the financial crisis, and then I would be rejected over a student from Oxford with a geography degree. It just, I didn't look into that person. Maybe outside of school they did God knows what to become like, a sales and trading person. But I'm just saying, on paper, why would you pick the one over the other just because you have Oxford on one side and like a no-name degree on the other one?
Yeah. Sales and trading is one of those areas I avoid on the channel. But to your point, right, I do see that a lot. I'll go through people's mean, we can look at everyone's profile. So I'll tell
Yeah,
students, they say, Dimitri, what school do I go to? And I'm like, go to an Ivy League, go to a big name.
yeah,
They go, why? I said, go look at, pick your companies, type in sales and trading. And to your point, I look at them and it's like English degree.
yeah,
I'm like, how is this relevant to financial markets? And
yeah,
I'm like criticizing it, scrolling through, going, to your point, right? No, no, no. They've got to have something in it. There's got to be something that sold them. And unfortunately, I think on the business side, it has gotten to that kind of unfortunate negative part where it's like we just try to pull from one specific pool because, you went to school there or your friends went to school there or you're donating money to these programs. Um, I don't know how we fix that either. I mean, I intentionally got out of my way. So I mean, the last job I had over 100 applications, the one before I had over 400, and I manually read every single application. Which to your point, right? If you had 35,000, it's like it's just not a feasible task. But I
yeah,
do think they could improve it. To your point, like these are the required degrees, this is the required experience, and then you could easily use that as a better filter instead of just like a school filter of let's find smart people. But that they're not going to last. I mean, I don't know if
yeah,
you know, but investment banking, right? A lot of investment bankers do 2 to 4 years and then they're
yeah,
out.
yeah,
So it's
yeah, I
like
know.
it's a stepping stone. It's ridiculous. I'm like, why not just hire someone interested in it that
Yeah,
really wants to do it, and then you don't have to retrain talent every couple of years.
yeah. Someone passionate about it and who sticks to it.
Yeah. Anyways, what made you move from Italy to the UK or to London specifically?
Yeah, it was solely because of the masters and then like having the opportunity to be in London, like in the financial area, London is still New York and London, they're pretty much the universe of the the center of the universe in the financial industry. And then because I started late with my bachelor's, I would have never imagined that I would make it to London, would have been a dream, like the most from Italy I was hoping for is either to end up in Milan or, Germany, Frankfurt or Switzerland, Zurich. Um, and I never imagined or even dared to dream that I could make it to London. And then yeah, when I applied at different universities, I got offers from UK universities. And then I was like, okay, I might as well go for it.
Hmm.
And then I did my 2 degrees here, and then I got the offer from City to work in the grad scheme, and then I started, and then I realized, okay, like I'm now in London. I made it to London, so I was a little bit proud of it, and then the next thing would have been New York, and I had the chance to eventually get there, but also I got a little bit older, I'm more now, I'm I'm more settled, I don't want to settle in the US. It's simply too far away from my parents, my family, my friends. The education system is even more expensive than it's already in the UK. So I knew I would only go to New York for a short stint of time. At some point I was saying, okay, I go for a year, but you know how things are. You never go just
Yeah.
for a year. And then I was like, okay, if I give up now what I built here and go to New York for a few years and then come back and have to restart building up again, it's just like, okay, just for the sake of going to New York, saying I've done it, I've have it on my CV.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, okay, I don't go.
That was me.
Hopefully.
I made that jump. I did the 1 year, and then the cost of living just killed me.
Yeah,
Right. But I mean, to your comments, right? It's kind of like a dream. Like I remember dressing up for the first day and I'm like walking downtown Manhattan, like just crossing a street, like jaywalking, thinking like this is like a movie. Like I've got like these big chain box stores and you got like the Chrysler building in front of me and the Empire State Building down the block. And it's like I'm going to work in a suit. And I actually got to work on Wall Street. So I actually
yeah,
worked at Citibank at 111 Wall, which is like right on the water. I mean, if anyone knows, Wall Street's dead in New York. Everything's moved up to like
yeah,
Midtown.
yeah,
But yeah, it was like this. It was a good accomplishment and a good life choice. And then at the end of the year, I'm thinking cost of living. I'm getting older. I'd like to settle down. The cost to raise a family in New York City would be so high.
yeah,
And I was like, I got to go back to Dallas. That's where I started my career at. It just seemed like a more stable place, I guess, in this big scheme of things. But I get that. It's hard to make that the justification. And then, yeah, you leave behind everything just to
Yeah.
make kind of that one, one checkbox on the resume.
Yeah. And then who knows, maybe 30 years down the line, maybe when my kids are, or I don't have kids yet, so, but maybe once they're grown up and independent, I can still say, okay, now I'm taking a managing director role at Wall Street, if Wall Street is still around at the time, because a lot of people seem to move out from those financial centers, outsourcing, trying to be more cost efficient, and things are moving, and hopefully also with remote working, it becomes more of a you can be wherever you want.
Yeah.
Why not?
I think New York's dying. I don't think anyone wants to admit it. But like even when I went, like it was really depressing going to Wall Street because in my head I have like, the bull on Wall Street and it's gonna be
Yeah,
bustling and you go and it's just dead. It's just a
yeah.
bunch of tourists looking at it. And then recently, I think it was like this last week, Dallas here in Texas announced they're gonna open a stock exchange and they're gonna compete with New York City.
Oh yeah, right. It was who was pushing that? Wasn't it Citadel and
I think BlackRock. Yeah,
yes,
Citadel and BlackRock.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So to your point, right, I'm starting to scratch my head like New York was cool and it's been the hub, it still is. But I start finding out like, oh, Goldman Sachs is in Dallas here and they're running their quant teams for all of the assets that are in New York. And then, Citi's here, Bank of America's here, JP Morgan's here. So I'm starting to think like you are like, I think it is going to start kind of decentralizing,
Yeah.
moving towards cheaper cities, better cost of funds. I don't know, just a better overall business environment.
You should buy some property there.
Yeah, it. I think so. I'm in Dallas now, and I think it's just going to be a long run. I've I don't know if you watch the channel enough, but this shop I'm in now, this office is a shop I built by myself on
Oh,
my
nice.
property, and I actually paid off my house yesterday. So now I officially own everything.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks. And to your point, right? I'm settled. Like I've had good job opportunities in New York, even ones in London, and I'm like, to your point, like I don't want to leave everything. I'm kind of
Yeah.
tied down. I've got two young kids now too, so it's like I don't want to be moving as much. But it will be interesting to see what happens in the long run with talent as we are seeing the remote work kind of coming back to the office, but it's still kind of spread out.
It's just a very old traditional mindset, like, ooh, if people are not in the office, they're not going to work from home. But if I don't want to work in the office, I'm not working there either. Like if I want to waste time, I can do it there either. And I've seen it. I mean, it's not my mindset, but I've seen so many people being in the office and wasting time or not doing anything, walking around, having coffee 5 times a day,
Yep.
chit-chatting with people. And then at the end of the day, they go home. And I'm like, okay, why do you penalize those people who actually work really hard and maybe, um, live on the outer skirt of a big city because they have young kids and they want to have a garden and offer them something, and then they need to take the train for an hour to get to work and then an hour back. So they're losing 2 hours a day just to be in the office to do the same job they could do from home in a much more calmer environment with their kids, maybe bring the kids or see their kids, especially when they're young, like either they drop them at kindergarten or wherever, and then by the time they come back in the evening, they might already sleep. So
Yeah.
just why and at the end of the day, you can measure productivity, like we all have our tasks to deliver. If we don't deliver them, then it's a clear sign that we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we deliver, why would you penalize us?
Yeah. The old system makes it very stressful too. So
Yeah.
my wife and I both technically work from home. She works from home 3 days a week and goes in the office too. I work 4 days a week at home and then one in the office. And to your point, I'm always stressed out, like, oh, people are gonna think I'm not working. But I'm
Yeah,
having the ability, I have my two kids at home, so I don't have to send them to daycare, which everyone's like, oh, it's a cost savings. But it's like if I have kids, right, I want to raise them and teach them,
exactly.
spend
You want
time
to do
with
something
them.
with them.
Yeah, like, what's the point of having kids if you're just going to send them off? And I've got neighbors and colleagues, and it's like, oh, I dropped my kids off this morning, 8 o'clock, and I picked them up at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I'm like, so you feed them breakfast, you kick them out the door, they get home, you spend, an hour doing homework with them, then you eat dinner and you put them in bed.
Yeah.
It's a very odd system. And I think we are in a modern time where it makes more sense to balance it, but it does make it stressful because now I'm always worried that, like, your employees or your managers are going to be thinking like, oh, you're screwing around. But to your point, I start thinking back to when I was at like Santander, and it's like I'd roll into the office, I'd get my computer turned on, but then I'd go and have coffee, and then my three colleagues are chatting about their weekends, and I check my emails, make sure I have a meeting to run to. But I mean, it's 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I'm getting going for the day. And
Yeah.
instead now it's, I'm feeding my kids breakfast and getting them set up with some educational activities to get going for the day. And then it's like, then you're working. It's kind of the same balance of you're still productive, you're still getting things done. I do hope it changes. I think a lot of it's the failure of the companies too. I find often people say, well, you can't interact with your colleagues as well. I'm like, you're right, I can't. But also, you make it challenging because I sign into an online meeting, which I can't get into, where nobody shows up because they go, oh, we forgot to start the Zoom link, or we had technical issues, or I think it's definitely a cultural shift that hopefully is coming, but I don't know. Wall Street has been quite negative on the
Yeah.
working remote.
Yeah. But what I find the most annoying is like during the pandemic when we had to work from home, everything was fine, and it was
Mhm.
all so great. And like, okay, yeah, it's working. We can do it. And now suddenly it's just like, okay, no, you have to come back because now you're no longer productive. Like, what are you saying? When I was at HSBC during the first 3 to 6 months of COVID, like the data volume was so high. The only thing we were doing is trying to keep the servers up and running
Mhm.
because the volatility during COVID was 3 times as much than on an average day. Like we were just trying to not have the servers crash down and keep running, and it works perfectly fine remotely from home.
Yeah.
You just log into a server, SSH in, and that's fine, and it's working. And like those emails we get, and thank you very much for doing such a great work, keeping us running. And now, like, oh no, now you have to come back to the office because you're not going to be productive at home. What are you talking about? Like
Yeah.
we did it for 2 full years. And now suddenly it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy, one of the chief risk officers I was talking to, he was, single, I think like 45-ish, 50 years old, always had to be in the office, hated working from home. COVID hit. And then all of a sudden he was like, you guys, productivity went up 25%. He's like, this is great. I didn't realize it would be so productive. And then from there on, he was always a proponent of it. But it was, yeah, it's hard to break that mentality of, working from home is bad. And then it's like it's weird. We're all going back to the office, but yeah, everyone's more productive. I think people are happier. I think that's part of the productivity drive. And then you
Yeah.
realize you have that hour commute to and from the office that you're no longer doing. So you're like, oh, I can fix a better meal, I can exercise, spend time with friends, family, spouses. Like I don't know, I get the added benefit of being in office and, rubbing shoulders with people you wouldn't normally talk to. But at the same time, I do think there is a good added benefit from that working from home kind of mentality with productivity. And I think just building that cultural piece is a little more challenging, but I wish more companies would do it because I'm not moving to New York anytime soon.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can always do like a week in the office, like once a month you bring everyone in for a week. Sure, like where, like onboarding at HSBC was really hard because I started in February 2020 and then in
Okay.
March we got sent home. So it's really hard to on board when from remote. So like for new joiners, for junior people, I would definitely not recommend that. I would make it much more interactive, personal, and meeting definitely. But then once someone is settled in and knows who to reach out to if they need support or who has the knowledge on certain pieces, then you can definitely let people work remotely and from wherever they are. And as you said, if people are happier, they're also more productive.
Yeah. I think that's a big factor we're kind of ignoring. A
Yeah.
lot of people are
Yeah.
just like, eh. Well, Alexander, it's been great having you on the podcast here. Would you want to answer one final question here of what advice
Sure.
would you give someone that wants to get into KDB? You've kind of touched on it throughout, but do you want to do a final plug of kind of resources and how you would start that?
Yeah. So definitely check out my blog, defconq.tech. We're going to tag it in the comments. Follow me on LinkedIn for updates as well. I have a great article on how to get started and my favorite go-to resources, how to learn KDB, which we can also put into the comments and you can find on my blog. Um, and then, yeah, download KDB, read Q for Mortals. While you read it, start practicing it, do it. And once you finish the book, just read it over again. Because I've probably read it like at least 20 times. And the more I read, the more I realized what I don't understand.
Hmm.
And then find a toy project, like a pet project you want to do. Start building, start exploring, reach out to other developers, get engaged in the community, ask questions. Like there's no wrong question. The only wrong question is the question you didn't ask. Um, Seek out for help, and I think that's the best way to get started.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.